All right, we are live. Hello,
Woo!
everyone. Hope you're doing well. Why don't you just drop in the chat where you're tuning from? I know we're all excited about this topic of how do we stop underestimating ourselves, because who doesn't, right? So put in the chat. If you're with us, we're just doing a quick sound test. We're a little early. Let me know in the chat where you're tuning from. Ourselves, because who doesn't? Okay, wonderful. Right? So put in the chat, if you're awesome. I am seeing all these people dropping in. We got 4 people so far tuning in live. It's going to grow like exponentially. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I'm so excited to have Steve here with me. I'll give you all a backstory of how we decided on this topic. So I talked to Steve back, I think, in December 2020 when I first started my business. And we had a great chat. At the time, Steve, you were at Shopify. You were a development manager at Shopify. Really enjoyed the conversation because Steve dropped a lot of golden nuggets for developers who are aspiring to get into manager roles. And what I loved about Steve, even though he's technical and comes from a technical background, and I love my developers, but sometimes I'm gonna this is the product manager in me who's, confessing. Is sometimes you do drive us a little nuts, okay? Um, I'm thinking Big Bang Theory, introverted. I don't want to talk to anyone. Nada, please deal with the clients. Don't let them bother me, okay? But Steve was different and really loved, how he is a heart-centered leader and how he values connection. And I think we all can learn from him today. So, long story short is Steve and I reconnected. I think it was literally a week ago.
Mhm.
And we were trying to brainstorm different topics. And I shared my story of, how I went through my own hardships in my business and how 2023, I mean, who here thinks 2023 was an insane year? All those layoffs, so much insanity. Drop in the chat like, if 2023 was not a great year for you. So as we were brainstorming and we were trying to tie it all in together, I asked Steve, like, what do you think is the number one reason that holds people back from progressing in their career as a people manager, as a mentor? What have you noticed that holds people back? Is it the certifications? Is it the competency? What is it? And we both agreed it's underestimating ourselves. So I'm going to give the floor to you, Steve, and I want you to share with us how did this all, start for you? Like, was there a moment, like, what was the lowest point in your career, if you don't mind sharing with us, where you realized that, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? Like, why am I underestimating myself?
Yeah, there are so many. There are so many, and I think one of the first ones that kind of clicked was quite early. I was working under the table as a busboy when I was 14. This was at a catering hall, and as a busboy, you could say it's not a glorious job. A lot of it was I threw out garbage every half an hour. I had to clean washrooms. I had to clean tables. So my shirt was dirty, full of food stuff all the time. And I thought to myself, well, I feel gross. People don't want to talk to me. When, I think I undersold my worth a lot because I was just a guy in the background dealing with garbage. And two things became true as I looked more and more at these events. One was that people actually don't look at you that way. I was very busy and running across the hall, and one of a few things would happen. Either one, guests would get out of the way because they thought I was busy, or they would hold the door for you because they said, shoot, this guy's got a lot of things on his hands. I mean, someone that looks down on you doesn't help you. They actually kind of sympathize with you and say, hey, let's just make your life easy. The second thing was knowing that I'm not alone. I have other busboys and other wait staff that are working alongside us. We're kind of doing this together, and the events weren't about us. It was somebody picking their wedding and saying, "Hey, I want to celebrate one of the most important things in my life at this location. I want to celebrate my son's bar mitzvah. I want to celebrate and have a great Christmas party for my team, my company, because I just want to show them how much I appreciate them." And they trusted our place to make that time special. And this is something that my boss told me and said, "Hey, look, I know the job's hard, but they chose us and they trust us with something that's really important to them. And the only thing that we have within our control is to make it special for them and to make that night seamless, because the one thing they don't have is control on how well something's going to go." Uh, and at that point, I realized, yes, the job isn't glorious, but the impact of it and how much of a difference just having a clean table and 8 seats to a to a table meant to somebody really made a difference. And when we start looking at all the little things that we do in life, we realize that it's not just about ourselves. It's really how big of an impact things can make down the road. And you don't undersell your talents, you don't undersell your skills. You really have to start looking at the big picture and say, you know what? Um, one little action we do today actually has profound and ripple effects down the road. And I think that's really carried along with everything I've done. Um, we can talk about the busboy. We can talk about the fact that I went through 2 trade skills
Wow.
before going into software engineering. I know that's something we talked about as well, and what it was like to do multiple career changes and say, I'm at a disadvantage here. I've got eight years less than other folks. What am I going to do to catch up? Um, and just being able to navigate that, I think, to your earlier point, Nada, I think a lot of us feel very unassured that we do hold ourselves back and we kind of get comfortable in this space with saying, hey, you know what, i'm a I'm a junior engineer right now. I'm going to need at least 10 years of experience before I'm going to even try to go for that promotion or say that I'm worth something. When in fact, and this is one of the things that I love, that I'm going to plug home base a bit here. um, I think one of the things that really hold ourselves back from growing is we tend to short sell ourselves and get comfortable with the things that we're familiar with, when actually the first sign that you're growing is someone's put you in a new box. That box is a lot bigger, a lot scarier. But the point of a big box is the same reason why we repot flowers. If you don't if you don't, repot your plants into bigger pots, then they won't grow. You're not giving them room to thrive. You're not letting them kind of explore what their potential is like. You're also just frankly holding them back, because if you were a one tool in a toolbox like a hammer and you got really proficient at hammering nails, what's going to happen when you got to deal with a screw? You can hammer that screw all you want, but the screw ain't going down. You got to adapt to your situation and say, hey, my hammering days are great, but there's more to me than just hammering things. I got to be a proficient toolbox.
Wow, that's an incredible story, Steve. And I remember us talking a lot about how you went through multiple career transitions, not just
Mhm.
one. And it was as drastic as you being, I believe, in, the restaurant industry,
Yeah.
to going into technical. Like, who would have thought? I know there are a lot of career transitioners tuning in. I recognize some of you. Haha. And I'm sure that, and hey, everyone, feel free to ask questions and engage, because we want to make sure that we address your questions. But
Mhm.
I bet one of the big things that is percolating in people's minds is, how did you gain the confidence to navigate your career transition, going from a non-technical field to a highly technical field? Was it you getting certifications? Was it the technical competency that gave you the courage? Like, what made you decide that, what, I am, worthy of this change,
Mhm.
and my, competency is on par with the people out there? Because we all feel that way when we are trying to enter into something that we've never done before.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And there's so many different ways to unpack this. So I'm going to bucket this into 2 places. One, I think that we call very often, we'll coin imposter syndrome. And I think we can talk a lot about that. The other part is I think it's a lot of that holding self back and kind of that comfort in dealing with our fear. I think the comfort and fear part is something we need to be cognizant enough to break away from, and I'll get into that. But let's deal with the imposter syndrome as well, because I think that's something that folks here can definitely, feel like they may have gone through it themselves. They may be still going through this today. Um, One thing I realized about imposter syndrome is there's a way to look at to say, "Oh shoot, I'm beyond my reach here," and all it required was a little nudge from some of my mentors who told me, "Look, this is when I was consulting, by the way, and in consulting, you're never going to know everything. In fact, your whole job is to figure it out on the spot." And so, one of my mentors told me was, "Hey, imposter syndrome is a sign that you actually know your own potential.
Wow.
Um, instead of people thinking that they're going to overestimate us, it's really that we're underestimating ourselves. You have imposter syndrome, not because you're incapable, but because you actually know you can do more. You just don't have it yet. So being able to see how much room you have, going back to this bigger box, is actually a really big deal. We're on the contrary, if you were in such a tiny box that your face is kind of like this and you've nudged the ceiling, you're going to feel very uncomfortable. You're going to say, "Well, I've outgrown those boxes. This is actually the worst feeling alive," as opposed to having the space to reach out and actually just uh, feel like there's so much more to what you can do. This is also kind of like the thing that makes careers exciting for me and for the people I work with, to say, "Hey, you've only started this now, but look how far we can go. Look how far we can take this." Yeah, it feels scary because, like any new box, we might only have a little candle to light to see our way. But you start with the way you start anything else. Explore your boundaries. Know where the edges are. How do we build puzzles? It's the same thing. We kind of start with the boundaries and work our way in. When you explore your box, that's kind of the fun of it, right? Yes, you have a little candle, but nothing's going to stop you from building that mental map for yourself and being able to navigate that. Uh, the other part of imposter syndrome, I think, is we always pay attention to the things that we're lacking instead of the things that really took us to get there. So I think one of the things that people tend to trap themselves with, "Oh, I'm not good because I'm not successful yet. I'm not good because I haven't made a big splash." What I rarely hear is, what are all the experiences that happened that allowed me to be here today? These are, I think folks really undersell the importance of celebrating failure, right? If you never made a mistake in your life, I would argue that you haven't grown. I think you, to be honest, learn more from failing because, frankly, if you haven't learned to fail, then how did you know how to get back up? How do you know that you need to show up tomorrow and say, "Hey, I didn't figure out how to do this today and I was wrong, but I'm going to try again." This kind of builds into resilience as well. And knowing that you were able to do that has a lot of confidence to say, not just that I have been able to do in the past, but that I was able to stand up. I can fall down 6 times, but I'll get up 7, because you know what? I'll show up again tomorrow and I'm going to keep trying. And just having that sheer will comes a big, long way. You don't need to know the answer, but you'll figure it out. Yeah. That's imposter syndrome. I'll leave it there to marinate
No,
and let folks chime in as
that is
well.
a great point. And what I really love that you've mentioned, of course, the former agile coach in me. Of course, I still consider myself an agile coach, because even within my career coaching programs, I have sprints and I'm all about iteration. I think we definitely struggle. I mean, one of the signs, actually, one of the types of imposter syndrome is perfectionism. That is one of
Mhm,
the type of imposter syndrome. It's about believing that unless you are absolutely perfect,
mhm.
you could have done better. You feel like an imposter because your perfectionist trait makes you believe that you're not as good as others might think you are. But the truth is, if you don't test and get feedback, you're not going to know and you're not going to grow. And something that I tell my clients is, hey, if it means that you're going to suck at the new job, then start sucking.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
Aim for that. It's not, it's only going to go upwards. right?
Yeah. Yeah, Nada.
It's only going to go upwards.
I love that you said that. And one of my favorite cartoons ever is Adventure Time because Jake the dog, who's the sidekick for Finn, one of the favorite lines I had for him was, "Sucking at something is the first step at being sort of good at something."
Exactly.
And I love that, and that's definitely been a motto of mine as well. It's I think the worst thing is to not know we suck because we haven't even tried. So we've
Exactly.
now set a baseline for ourselves to say, you know what, I suck today. That's great. Now I have a starting point to say, to your point, Nada, I can learn better, and I'm just going to keep growing from here because at least I know where I'm coming from.
100%. And this is cracking me. I got to get all of the sucking out of the way. Okay. um, one of my clients, Tesse, who actually is a career transitioner, she was from Nigeria and she broke into product management after being a physician. Like,
Wow.
again, one of those impressive stories like you, Steve, where you went from a field that is so unrelated to another field. She was going through imposter syndrome and she was saying, I'm scared of failing. What if I, build the wrong products? What if I cause, the businesses to tank? And I asked her a simple question. I said, okay, so when you were a doctor and you finished medical school, um, did you study all types of patients and all different kinds of illnesses? Have you ever encountered an illness that you've never seen before? And she said, yeah. So I asked her, so what did you do? How did you, treat the patient? And she said, well, I tried a few things. And I said, so here you are in a situation where there could be life or death, or, and you tried. So if a doctor is allowed to try, I mean, let's be honest, everyone, unless you're in the medical field, what we're doing is not necessarily going to kill anyone if we make a mistake. So what is the harm? What is the harm in testing things out, right? What's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah.
And in organizations, they're structured in a way where you have a safety net in most of the time, right? You have leadership levels. So yeah, if Tessa was if it was okay for a doctor to basically experiment on a patient, then it's okay for us to go into a job and experiment and learn from there.
Yeah, 100%. I know Christopher Dixon has a comment here. And before I get to that, one thing I'd love to add on to that, Nada, is I think the other thing that really gave me confidence was this idea of affordances. So, if anyone's ever read this book, it's The Design of Everyday Things. There's this notion of affordances. Is if we look at a doorknob to a door, it's you can know how to use something without it having a label that says "Turn me." And I look at life the same way. It's everything we look at. It's designed for you to know how to act on it. And when you look at growth potential, I kind of see the same thing. It's everything around us in life is actually designed for this idea of what I call growth affordance, right? Um, if you think about the fact that every new hire gets set up with a manager, that is by design because you're not here to grow on your own. You have a team and you have a dedicated person who wants to make sure that you're set up for. Uh, the organizations themselves has a whole system of, hey, there are steps and roadmaps because there are things to aspire to be. Here are signals that show that you have healthy growth, but also there are things that we help document to make sure that we see this whole journey because not the career coach today. There were steps and things that she could look forward to before she had her master level of distinction, as an example. You knew what that was going to look like, but you're going to need someone to kind of guide you there. And so that person was in place. The fact that we used to work at a small office and now there are bigger size offices to work from. I can't think of more literal form of a bigger box. The fact that we scale up our projects and scale up our little passion things to serve 10,000 people to over 1 million, and how that changes the complexity of things. It's, well, every step of the way, you're going to have things you're going to discover that kind of help what you're going through. It's just a matter of can you find them or not. Uh, Even the inspiration behind this was in video games as well. If we think about Super Mario Brothers, you're taking very primitive actions like running and jumping, very simple concepts. You hit a block, you jump a gap, but they end up to be the bread and butter of the game. And you can see just from very simple running and jumping how complex a game can get and become $1 billion franchise. So
Yeah.
we can't underestimate the little things that help teach us life skills and how to get better.
I agree with you. That, Super Mario analogy cracked me up. Well, first because, I'm a huge Super Mario fan, but it also reminded me of dance because, before 2020, before the pandemic happened, I used to dance salsa and bachata, and
Mm.
I was 3 years into it at that point in time. And something that I learned from my dance instructors, which stayed with me and I continue to teach my clients, is sometimes we have a tendency as high achievers to want to learn a whole bunch of things instead of focusing on the basics, on the foundations. And what you just said is beautiful. When it comes to scaling our career, it's not necessarily about continuously chasing after the shiny things and adding to our learning. It's about mastering the foundations and taking them to the next level. So in dance, there are basic moves in salsa and bachata,
Mm.
and they can be boring if in isolation you are continuously practicing them like the basic step. But once you master it, then you can combine it with a few other moves and add variations. And what distinguishes an amazing dancer from a beginner dancer is that the advanced dancer has perfected those foundational steps, and they are now allowed to break the rules and to create that variety. Whereas a beginner dancer will ignore them, try to be all fancy, and when they're on the dance floor, especially when you're partner dancing, they end up confusing their partner and they're not able to work with them, which is weird because this also extends to the analogy of a workplace where you have this person who's on a team not listening to other people and trying to do their own thing and thinking that they're going to get promoted.
Yeah, I love that Vachata story. It just there's so much to unpack there. There's
I know,
the
just
rhythm and
true.
the dance. There's uh, there's this whole other tangent about there's a dance in life which is related to this. It's when you meet your dancing partner for the first time, you have no idea how they're going to think about you. You have no
Yeah.
idea what's going in your head. You may be super nervous to say, "Hey, I don't know if my moves are good enough. Am I going to screw this up? Are they going to hate me for it?" I think one part of underestimating ourselves also comes from not knowing how other people think. Our first job interview, as an example, our first date, when someone says, "Excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom," and you think, "Oh crap, this is the worst date in the world. They don't even want to talk to me. They're just trying to run the bathroom to hide." When one of the things I've come to peace with is it couldn't be further from the truth, and that the other person is really just, well, one, they're equally nervous as you because they also don't know you yet, but two, especially in that manager and hiree relationship, it's a manager's job in that interview is saying, "Hey, um, I really want to make sure that this is the right place for you because I don't want to waste your time. I want to make sure that this is a place where you feel like I'm offering a big enough pot for you to grow because I think there's a lot of upside here, but I can't, I can't, you know, I can't invoke my vision because I want you to live through it yourself." There's also the awkward part about talking about money. From the employee side, it's I want to be paid what I think I'm worth. From the employer side, it's being able to say, "Hey, we're the more than just money here. Money's great, but I also want you to see all these other great things about the people you're going to work with, the mission that we're kind of pushing." And if we focus on money, are we going to dwell on that topic too much and have an awkward back and forth? So um, I think there's a lot to just think about in terms of seeking to understand. And when we interact with folks, instead of overcomplicating what they may think, we can
Mm.
instead come in and think, okay, well, what did I learn about this person and their intentions? And if they weren't explicit about that, could I just ask and say, hey, when you say this, is your intention trying to tell me about my growth path, so that I kind of get context to why we're saying this right now? Or are we talking about comp because we just want to get out of the way and be realistic about our expectations? All these things come up as well.
So I think that's a great segue to Christopher's question. He's
Yes.
asking, I have the anti-imposter syndrome. I know I'm awesome, but no one will hire me to let me try. What is your advice for Christopher?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is like let's look at facts and not look at confirmation bias, right? Um,
Mhm.
so Christopher Dixon, without being able to look at your profile right now, I would assume that you've been hired in the past and that you've actually had a very proficient career, and perhaps some things have changed recently that were out of your control. So to that, I always ask two questions. One is, knowing the last time you got hired, would you have how would you tell your story differently today? Is it the same story you're going to tell? How have you grown since then? And for the roles that you're applying to, are they the same roles? And are those stories and expectations still the same? Have we calibrated for that? Have you actually had chit chats with new hiring managers and just gauging their thoughts and saying, hey, I've been having a lot of trouble with getting hired, and I think I'm really strong in this. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear some of the feedback you've been getting and soliciting. I think there is, at one point, we might have been really good at what we're doing. I think it's also important for us to be kind, but also honest to ourselves to say, my skills are great. Um, is there anything I could do differently, or is there anything else I should look forward to? Technology is a fickle thing where there's one way we can do something one day. We just have to kind of adapt and learn and evolve as we go as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, especially in a market like we opened with 2023, we have to realize that there's two circles to think about. There is the circle of things we can actually control. There's a circle of things we can influence. And there's actually a third circle. There's a circle of things that are out of anybody's control. The condition of the market, unless you were working for the largest institutions in the world, we had very little control over the condition of the market. And that's something that we couldn't have foreseen. The things we can control are actually very small. It's a little dot. We can control how we react. We can control how we treat ourselves. We can control the content in our resume. The influence part comes in how somebody may receive our resume, and that we have to accept that there is multiple possible outcomes. Some people may like our resumes, some people don't. Some people will enjoy their interviews, some people won't. And the only thing we can really do about that is say, hey, there is a possibility that the interview didn't go well, but nothing stops me from trying to get as much experience and understanding out of that as possible, because I control whether or not we're going to have follow-up dialogue and what insights are valuable to me. So I hope that helps you, Christopher.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. That's amazing advice. One little piece that I'm going to add in terms of, within my expertise of positioning people, a lot of people tend to have imposter syndrome, especially if they've been in organizations where they weren't able to see through the projects that they were on. I get that all the time.
Mm,
I got laid off before this got pushed out. I changed jobs before this got pushed out. So I don't think I should put it in my resume because it's not complete. I wasn't part of the change. I wasn't part of the transformation. And that, I think, is one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is their idea of something being successful goes back to what you're saying, Steve, is it's not about you being able to launch chat gpt or launching a rocket to the moon. That's not how at least in what I've learned from hiring managers and being a hiring manager myself in the past. It's about me seeing whether you've learned or not.
mm,
Even if what you were part of might have failed, are you going to save me as an organization from failing the same way that the other organization failed,
Mhm.
right? So it would be helpful for us to all consider our stories as mini transformation stories, and the improvements that we brought into the organization as micro improvements or micro wins. Even if it's, a small improvement to save your team time and
Mhm.
frustration, to help your team members not want to quit their job, right? It's not always tied to a big business win. And also, we have to understand that when we're working in an organization, it's not just us. Even the CEO of a company is not responsible for an entire thing. They contribute to it. So always think to yourself, what was the overall company win or change or micro improvement, and what was the piece of the puzzle that I contributed to? And even if it's small, I can still talk about it in an interview or resume. So hopefully that is also helpful, because it's a recurring question that I keep getting. I want to segue a little bit. I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this, because I really feel that how we, a big reason as to why we underestimate ourselves, there is a huge root to it. It's,
Mhm.
and I think we talked about it a little bit before we got on this call, Steve. It really, to me, you know, it comes back to childhood, to
Mm.
trauma that we experience, whether it was trauma because we did not receive enough recognition from a previous boss. Maybe they always nitpicked on everything we did wrong, and not enough on what we did right. But to me, it also goes all the way back to childhood. So, want to share with us a little bit, Steve, in terms of, I know we're both, we come from immigrant families. I personally am a first generation Canadian, and come from a Middle Eastern family where, hey, like, you got to be a doctor or an engineer, otherwise you're a failure. Um,
Yeah, right. Yeah, classic. Doctor or lawyer or nothing.
and the lawyer wasn't even on the table. My
Oh, man. Well, that's tough. One way.
So why don't you share with us a little bit, like, you personally, what do you feel has, created that self-doubt for you, and how did you push through it?
Yeah, in this case, I'll start with the solution before the root. I think what we aspire to do with imposter syndrome is on a good day, the way I look at this is we grow up to be the person we wish we had. And the reason why I start with that is if we're, self-checking ourselves and thinking about what we need to do, we need to just reflect on where it actually started hurting, and whether we realize it consciously or subconsciously, we actually start self-healing this way because we wish we had this. We wish we had that. We wish we had an older version of ourselves to talk to kind of navigate what we've done. But actually, we've done it because that's why we're still here. And you and I are chatting today, right? And
Yeah.
surviving through the hardships. So if we start with that, then we realize that there is a way through a lot of the trauma that we deal with. Um, there's an interesting philosophy called the wounded child. And where this ties into is because of the traumas we dealt with, having parents that say that we're not enough. And even it's not just parents, it's just even our upbringing, having people that we say are not enough. That reflects in us overcompensating by now doing too much and often burning out ourselves to prove our worth. It may come from us finding the need to differentiate, and we end up hating the person we become and saying I'm too different, I can't be like them, and feeling like we have an identity crisis. It may come from neglect and treating everyone else in a hostile way and saying I don't trust anybody, or the fact that we question our own existence and saying, you know what, I'm not important in this world because somebody abandoned me when I was little, therefore I'm worthless. A lot of these fears, I give them all a name because human nature is funny. When we think about Neanderthal times, we are programmed to survive, and the way you survive is you start imagining scenarios. You start imagining you're in a cave and saber-toothed tiger is going to come into that cave, or a mammoth is going to come to that cave, or dinosaurs are going to erode themselves from the soil, and there's zombie dinosaurs now, and they're going to come into the cave, right? We imagine all the scenarios and prepare ourselves because we need to start getting ready to know what to do when those things happen, but in actuality, they don't. Um, this is an innate program mechanism because we fear the unknown to prepare ourselves so that we feel a certain degree of safety. And as silly as that sounds, this is actually what childhood trauma does. When we start having one instance of a wound that hurts us, we start believing that those things can happen again and again and again. And we're conditioned to think that these things are inevitable. So what's really demoralizing and deconstructive at times is we take this one instance and extrapolate it, and we keep thinking of different scenarios because we have this false confirmation that's going to happen again. And so we end up kind of trying to find a place of safety and saying, I need to feel safe again. So I'm going to dream up of all these different things that could happen and over prepare for them because at least then I will feel safe. What in actuality, one, we need to be able to put aside and say, hey, this is just my brain trying to survive. This is not real. Part of this is we're filling up all this mental capacity with disaster planning instead of just being able to, one, assess facts, two, to the earlier point about when you're talking to someone else in the room, when you're talking to your date, when you're talking to a potential future manager, instead of worrying about all the things that they're going to say to you or all the things about where you're wrong, spend that same mental energy to really get to know them, to seek to understand and understand their intention. If you're focused more on how they're trying to help you, if you're focused more on all the other things that are actually happening in a literal, tangible sense, then you actually get your mental capacity preoccupied with things that are actually more constructive. I think the most important thing is just being cognizant of it and being able to compartmentalize and moving on. The idea that I borrow from acceptance therapy a lot is you don't try to dissipate it. You try to be aware of it and be able to say, hey, this is a part of me, but it is not all of me. It is just who you are, but it does not define where you are going to be today. It does not define who you're going to be tomorrow. It is something that you've experienced and you've grown from. It may actually even empower you, right? I think in the right amount of dosage as well. And so that's why I kind of bucket into different categories. We can dive into the categories all you want, but
You're so good
there's a
at
lot there.
categorizing things. The
I
developer
try.
in
I
you
try to,
is like,
I like buckets.
let's create all these classes and let's abstract them.
I like to
I'm
give
just
things
speaking
names.
out right now.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like a pizza guy today. Sometimes I feel like a fried chicken guy. I like both.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and so I try to give things names because at least if I know how to identify them, then I know how to be cognizant of those things and say, hey, this is just an internalized feeling. And now I know how to perhaps express it to myself or even express
Totally.
it to others, to other people that might be going through the same thing. And maybe they have ways that they're dealing with it as well. I mean, both you and I have a similar complex of not enough,
Yeah,
right?
that's why we decided to launch this talk.
Absolutely.
That's great, Steve. Those are really great tactics. I think for me, my God, I mean, a lot of people here know my story, right? I mean, I immigrated at the age of 18, literally with two suitcases. And a lot of people tell me, "Oh, you were in the Middle East, like you were in Bahrain, which is a tiny island next to the UAE and Saudi Arabia." Yes, all of these rich countries full of oil. And they're like, really? You left all of that behind and you came to Canada? And, I'll tell you all, I mean, I'm pretty sure I would be making a lot more money if I stayed there. I'd have a bigger house. And no, I'm serious. Not to mention that up until maybe this year, you didn't have to pay any taxes. So I would be pocketing like all of the
Wow.
money. I'd be rich. I'm telling you, I'd be rich.
Wow.
But anyway, the reason, I left that all behind and it felt that it was worth it for me to leave all of that, to leave, my entire family, all of the history behind was because of childhood trauma. My father was an alcoholic. I'd come home and every day was a surprise. It was just terrifying. It got to the point where it was terrifying. So to me, the ticket out of there was fleeing, and the grass felt, a lot greener, basically, and I felt safer. Um, Funny enough is I work with a therapist who, shares a similar story, and she basically said to me, "You did what I did, which is I decided to go the other end of the world just to be away from my father." And yes, that was exactly it for me. So I realized very recently that I was diagnosed with PTSD, basically. I couldn't understand why I was, reliving certain moments, why, like I never really get that nervous when I'm presenting or anything like that. But there is that this anxiety that I couldn't explain that would randomly happen, or it would randomly be triggered by events. So all of this combined is what have created all the self-doubt for me. Um, been in the corporate world, was in the corporate world for 15 years and probably stayed in a job like 5 years longer, and then finally quit over text. Decided that it was safer for me to do something I hated, even if it didn't bring me joy, because of that imposter syndrome, because of that fear of the unknown. Um, so it is something that, you know, it's hard to rewire, but you can rewire it, is what I learned. Because heck, now I'm in a to give you all hope that it is possible. I'm in a field and in a type of job that is highly unpredictable, highly unstable. As an entrepreneur, you never know what next month's cash flow is going to be like, and the learning curve is very steep. But that is because, I did a lot of therapy, I worked on myself. It created that awareness that was very helpful. So, my tip for everyone is where you begin is you talk about your past and you unpack it with a professional. One of the big components that I do with my career coaching clients is we do some journaling called Chunks of 10, where we look at your entire childhood from birth all the way to present. And we don't just talk about work, because all of us are obsessed with work. And are we competent? And what our projects are? We need to look at our entire life holistically. And when we do that, we become more ourselves, and we discover what's been holding us back. We discover what behaviors we need to change, and we end up in roles that are more who we are versus, corporate zombies.
Uh, no, I can't emphasize how much I think folks here really appreciate that story. I'm trying. I'm
I
trying to
don't know
hold,
what to say.
hold
I'm
myself
so
back.
shocked.
It hit home. It really hits home on a lot of numbers. I really appreciate how vulnerable you can be at times, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're able to have platforms like this. Is
Yeah.
hopefully other people can connect and share and really understand that things are hard, and that's what makes us so good at what we do. It's just being able to just be. I'm going to borrow a term called anti-fragile. Uh, we all know what fragile is, but to be anti-fragile, I think is definitely a trait that we undersell a lot of the times. There's a lot of different ways. I think we're both kind of also thinking about us is that we are continually building our story. You
Yeah.
kind of alluded to this earlier. I call it kind of like the portfolio of learning, right? Some of
Yes.
us do a GitHub repository. Some of us actually have our own blog, our own website. Some people might say, "Oh shoot, I haven't done any of that. I need to catch up." But in fact, if any of you have a resume, which I'm sure you all have, honestly, that's enough. You have the scaffolding of everything you need to tell your story. It's not just about you being a project manager or you being a junior engineer or a career coach. It's, well, what were all the things that got you here? How did you decide on that? How did you get good at it? And you realize there's so much to unpack. And yes, it's going to start from the very beginning in a different continent, in a different circumstance, maybe not a great circumstance, but all these little decisions, all these little failure points got to this way. And I'll insert a little pro tip. I think that's also what makes a great interview as well, is how you're able to navigate people through that experience and have a story to tell. And I highly doubt um, anyone here has a boring story. And I can confirm that because one exercise I will give for all the listeners here is, you know yourself best. You know that if you were to pitch your own TV show for your own life tomorrow, you know your own theme song, you know your own end credits. You also know that you're going to root for the underdog, which is you. There are supporting people that help build your character. There are also silly moments, like, you forgot to wear socks and now you're going to work with wet feet. Just these little things that only you find funny, right?
And
Uh,
what makes the interviewer laugh and what
right?
builds that connection
Yeah.
versus you being like, I did software engineering, I know
Yeah.
Java, I know.
Yeah. And what better thing can you do than just to laugh at yourself and saying, that was silly. A stranger waved to me and I waved back, only realized they were waving to the person behind me. I feel silly, but you know what? I'm going to tell
Yeah.
that story because I was so embarrassed, right? Uh, but one thing that's great is I think everyone has the ability to make their own TV show if it's in your head. And I think the reason why I love that concept so much is, you can have good days, you can have bad days, but you're going to wait to see what the next episode's like because you want to see how they're going to get out of it. Every single hardship we go through, we don't stop because we want to know how we're going to get out of it. So whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's a struggle you're dealing with, whether you feel like it's a setback, you are excited about your TV show because you know this is not the end. It's going to be another season. It's going to be another episode. You may even have a moment where some great event happens and just a stroke of luck that just solved everything. Awesome, right? That saves the writers some creative time. But you're always going to look for the next episode to see how things are going to unfold because, frankly, that's what keeps your TV show exciting, and that's the TV show you create for yourself.
Wow, that is so good. And I'm not gonna say much about this because I'm gonna like recap it towards the end because
Mm,
this is like a light bulb moment right there.
mhm,
But I wanna, bring in some questions from the audience. And the first one here that I'm seeing is, how can someone with imposter syndrome overcome their self-doubt to confidently take on leadership roles, despite feeling like they may not be qualified or deserving of the position? And so, Steve,
mm,
I'm going to go very pragmatic here
mm.
and put you on the spot. You as a hiring manager,
Yep.
what do you look for in someone to know definitively that they are ready to go to the next level? Do you look at their skills, their technical skills? Do they have the technical skills? Do you look at their soft skills? How do you make that decision? I'm so curious.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that this person is someone who's just crossing the gap between an individual contributor to a leader. So I'm going to answer it with that frame in mind. Um, to be honest, I think we can never prepare for the role we're going to enter, especially if we've had no experience. So I'll start with, don't over prepare. The things that a really good manager will look for is seeing your potential. What is a leader? I'm sure this person has worked with leaders that they've loved to work with in the past. What did they do? What made them special? Part of being a leader, honestly, is not actually being the loudest person in the room. It's actually quite the opposite. It's how good are your listening skills and how good are you at actually not being the only person with solutions. How did you work with your team and how did you highlight others? How did you collectively hold everyone accountable and say, hey, we have this collective sense of ownership. How did we row together in the same boat? You don't have to be a leader to say all these things. You just have to be aware of the situation and be cognizant of all things you can do to bring your team up, be it a silly joke that brings everyone's smile so that even if it was a tough time, that they were able to navigate through it because as tough as the work was, it was still enjoyable because they were amongst peers that respected each other. It's about saying that I'm capable of more. How did I know that I was able to cross the I see gap to the leadership gap because I think some of the knowledge I have is useful for others. And I think I have potential here to say, hey, um, this knowledge is not only for myself, it's I want to help others succeed. And just that drive alone can go a long way if you have sufficient cases where you've helped folks. And help folks doesn't, by the way, helping folks doesn't always mean that you are the center of competency. I think that's also a misnomer at times. Even just you being resourceful is saying, hey, I'm not a great career coach, but Nada is. Why don't I set up a conversation with her? And just being able to follow through. There's, I think an emerging leader is really just about being resourceful and just being present and just having those stories to tell about folks that look up to the past. It's also about, well, okay, even if you given your first shot as a leader and not feeling like you were confident enough to do it, what in your story told you that that was the case? Did you actually try it? What happened? I think one thing I look for as an interviewer is even if you didn't successfully lead the project the first time, tell me what went wrong. Tell me what you think could have been better. I'd rather you go through that experience and share that with me because that tells me what you're going to do next. It tells me that you understand, you know what you don't know now. I think the worst folks that could possibly pop up are they have nowhere where to start and they say, "Tell me how to be a leader," and I'll do it. But there's obviously more substance that has to come with that. Um, I hope a lot of that helps as well. And with any job, I would also say, you have to be uncomfortable with. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable with feeling embarrassed. I think the worst thing to do as a leader is to overcomplicate solutioning. Uh, there's a book by Patrick Lencioni called Getting Naked. I don't mean this in a literal sense. I mean, when you go to a client or you go to a new team that you haven't met, the worst thing you can do is present them a deck with everything that you're going to solve instead of just standing there with nothing and just build trust by listening to their concerns. You learn a lot more just by synthesizing the context that you're getting and then being able to see things. There's a fear of inferiority, I can't use words anymore. Fear of inferiority, being able to put your own ego aside. Being a leader is not about you. It's about making sure the needs of others are more important than your own. It's also about fear of losing relationships. I think I'm going to try to rated G this analogy. I'm going to call it the sugar sandwich. I think being a leader is also trusting that you can say hard things. There are unfortunate truths that we have to tell people sometimes, and the worst thing we can do is sugarcoat it. I think just being genuine and honest goes a long way, and being intentional of saying, hey, we're not here to bring this person down. We're here to make sure that we're addressing the real issues here because we don't want these to skirt by because we actually want to better these other people. And we can't really do that if we're saying, Steve, I think you're doing really well in this and good job, bye. You're not helping anybody, right? Really good leaders actually are not afraid to tell the truth because in the long run, that's really what's going to set your team up for success and make sure that we don't hide things in plain sight.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I wanted to share a little story of how I had to overcome this personally. So, first of all, I transitioned into career coaching, never had the title, never was a career coach. And one of my biggest fears, I remember expressing it to my mentor, was, but I've never been a recruiter. How the heck am I going to help people with their interviews? And I don't know how recruiters think and all of that stuff. But I learned it. I networked with recruiters. I interviewed a lot of recruiters. I got mentorship from a former VP of HR and a recruiter with 20 years of experience. And I learned everything I could from every single person I knew. So back to your, a great leader is able to set their ego aside and feel comfortable not knowing the information or being an expert, I think what was helpful is that I was an agile coach at some point. So I understood that when someone asks me a technical question or a client tells me, how are we going to build this? That I shouldn't be the one making the decisions. I should consult my team and my developers, right? So I learned this back then, that transferable skill. Ooh, look, see what I'm doing? I learned that transferable skill that you should not be like, don't be a micromanager. If you're thinking that you need to know everything, that means you're moving towards being a micromanager versus being a facilitator and a resourceful person, right? The other thing that I encountered is actually a quick story is that one of my clients, I got a client who was a PhD, and she was an assistant professor in theater. She engaged me to help her with her resume. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to, back then I was writing people's resumes for them. And I was thinking, oh my God, I feel like a fraud. I'm going to get caught. She's going to find out that I suck at writing. This person like has a PhD and her English level is way beyond me. How the heck am I going to be able to help her? Right. And I even remember pushing her away. She was like, I want to work with you. And I'm like, I'll refer you to my mentor. And then my mentor was like, Nada, it's time that you go out of your comfort zone and branch outside of tech. Stop just working with tech people. You're going to get bored. Like,
Mm,
branch out in different industries, right? So, anyway, she really insisted on working with me. And you know how she picked me was not because I had 30 years of experience as a career coach, but it's because we connected personality wise. We had similar stories, we had similar childhood background, and she just felt comfortable working with me. It wasn't because I was the top career coach. It was because she was comfortable working with me. So there you go. That's your little analogy for interviews. It's about connection. So anyway, I was doubting myself. I was telling myself the story that, she's going to see her resume and she is going to not like it. And I remember I was so stressed out. And I told her after the fact because I didn't want her to feel bad. I ended up in the hospital from stress, okay, while I was writing her resume and pulling it together. I sent it to her. She saw it and she was sending me this gif where she was like freaking out. She was like, I cannot believe how you beautifully put this together. I cannot believe how you were able to pull the information out of my head and craft this beautifully. So here you go. Sometimes we question ourselves. We think that we're going to suck because we didn't have the exact career trajectory as a person. And sometimes it's not about having all of the answers. It's about being a great guide and making people feel comfortable. So you don't necessarily have to do what your team has done to be able to be their manager, but you can be a great guide and a great person who asks great questions.
100%. 100%. Uh, I feel like we could go on forever just with that one alone. There's like, just being able to cross that chasm and
We
see
might
how
have to
things
bring
go.
you in for a part two, Steve. I'm telling you, man.
Yeah. There's man, there's also great questions coming in the chat. Hino has a good one. Norman has a good one. Yeah, let's do Hino's first because I think this is a multifaceted one without much context. There's two ways we can take this, right? Um, I think one of the ways that I like to approach this first, it's actually funny enough research that I just happened to stumble across called the liking gap. It's by Professor Erica Boothby, who studied at Boston Yale, if I remember right. So she spent about 10 years studying psychology of why can't two strangers read each other's minds and what that ends up showing like externally in the real world. So take the dating situation, take a manager to employee relationship, and the discrepancy between the thought versus the actuality is called the liking gap. And what she found was that the more and more we grow into each other, the more and more that liking gap shrinks. But it doesn't happen automatically, right? It happens through. This is a little bit of a plug. It happens through how we cultivate the culture of us being open and having honest dialogue. It's how I pick my places. Much happy to talk about that. It's also about making sure that we understand each other's intentions. So earlier we talked about fear. One of the things that I think I try not to dwell on is I have my own fears about what's going to happen. I may have PTSD from things that have happened to me now or in the past. But actually, the other side of this is other folks emit their fear in very weird ways. And sometimes, as destructive as it is, we may have not great bosses that pull us down or helicopter us or micromanagement because they're actually feared of some they're scared of something themselves and they have no idea how to cope with it. Their imposter syndrome, if anything, is worse than ours because maybe they feel like there's an insurmountable of pressure that they just
More
don't know
exposure.
how to cope with, right? So if it's that sort of liking gap situation, one of the things I try to do to break that barrier is just straight up ask them and say, hey, one, it's not, I know it's not me. I try not to take it personally. Look, you're taking this out on me because you're frustrated. What are you actually scared of? Like, we're a team here. And I'll admit, this hurts me because, you pull me down. I don't feel great about my work, but I'm going to not take this personally and say, hey, there's something here that clearly you don't feel great about. Let's talk through it. I want to learn and understand you because at the end of the day, we're on the same team. We're rowing the same boat here. Help me help you. And just being able to unpack that. I think it's really tough for some people to have that conversation sometimes because they feel like, depending on their trauma, nobody's had their back, and they've had to depend on no one except for themselves, and they have to learn. And sometimes that's through us to say, hey, you actually can trust other people, and you have to learn to let go. Uh, you may be the first person to do that for them, and that says a lot about you to be able to be someone that can grow that certain way to grow the other direction. It's your manager is not growing you, you're growing them. And I think that's an incredible skill and opportunity to dive into. So
Yes, reaching
that's the
upward.
liking gap scenario. Yeah. The other scenario, of course, is if you have someone that you find that it's hard to do that, remember that you don't have to solve these things alone. You have your other colleagues that you can try to talk to in confidence. You have other leads and other managers, but also bring in your HR business partner as well if you need help with that counseling. Just know that a lot of these tough situations, if you don't feel like you're ready to solve it, then you also don't have to do these alone.
1,000%. And what I'll say too is, just like, in any relationship, because an employment engagement is a relationship. It is a relationship, right? No
Hmm.
different than any personal relationship. Sometimes we might be surrounded by the wrong people. And when I say wrong, I'm not saying they're bad or you're bad. It's just that there isn't a great fit.
Hmm.
And sometimes we have to find our own tribe. And sometimes we have to figure out if we've outgrown that environment or
Hmm.
if we are better served in a different environment. That's why in my career archetype assessment, I really get people to dial in into what archetype they are and what type of collaboration style is in alignment with who they are and what type of environment they should look for so that we're not forcing chemistry.
Hmm.
And I think one of the big mistakes that we also make is we pretend that we're someone else and we people please while we're in interviews. So
Yeah.
then when we're not being our true selves, then we end up in a situation where we have to keep pretending we're someone else in the workplace. And that is not sustainable. So it's very important to bring our authentic selves and to figure these things out. All right, we are at the top of the hour. And Steve, I want to be respectful of your time. You're very generous with your time. Maybe we'll have a sequel, who knows?
Yeah.
But I wanted to, wrap up this conversation and say that there's a lot of good learning, you know, in there. And if I were to sum it up, I really love what you brought in earlier about us owning our story and how we're able to rewrite our own story. And a lot of you know that I'm a big, believer of storytelling. That's why I have a boot camp called the Storytelling Boot Camp. That's how much I love storytelling. It has truly changed my life. And I think if I were to sum it all up, I will say figure out what your story is and own it. Because once you do, you're going to be able to articulate it, and you're going to attract the right opportunities, the right environments for you, and get someone to help you unpack the story, whether it's unpacking your blockers that are holding you back from maximizing, your career and scaling your career, whether it is articulating your value because it feels like a tangled cobweb. I just had the same conversation with my editor today. Oh my God, I've done so much in the past 4 years and I've had 200 clients. Can you help me break it down? Right? It's hard to do it for ourselves. That is something, that I offer. Steve is also a great mentor that you can connect with, especially if you have a development background. A little bird also told me that there are opportunities in your organization as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Nada. Yeah, I'll tackle on one thing, and I'll say that to your story thing. The one motto I like is history's read. It's also being written. Right. So just remember that when you think about your story, everything you do is writing your history. So um, I think that's definitely the point to take home today. The plug I'll have is look, uh, a lot of the things that I've learned to grow and a lot of things I've learned to do, I definitely owe it to all the mentors in my life. I'm going to quickly answer Norman. Mentors are everything. I think there's the proactive way of going out to seek them because obviously we want to learn what other people have learned and hear their story. I think also sometimes you find mentorship in places that you wouldn't expect. I found it in my therapist. I found it in my wife. I found it in my kids, and just being able to see things from their eyes. Um, the whole point of a mentor is not so much the wisdom that they share, but being able to see things differently and offer different perspectives and saying, huh, I wouldn't have thought of things that way. And now it's about not that you just unpacked wisdom, but now you have new ventures of things that you didn't realize were there. And now you can go explore those things, which is absolutely huge for you towards that, big box of learning for yourself. The biggest box being, of course, seeing your full potential. So that's one thing. Um, I, you know, all this comes together to say one of the reasons why I chose home base today and why I'm here is it's a place where I feel like a lot of those boxes really ticked for me. We did a lot of things around our rubric because we didn't want people to have these tiny little pots and feel safe. We did it because we were scared that if we kept these little pots that they wouldn't grow, but also that we wouldn't realize the true potential of so many talented folks that were here before I was to say, hey, we have really good people. We just need to be able to allow them to explore their potential here. We can't do that if the rubric doesn't allow that to shine. Certainly those type of conversations, the impact we're making, but also what I don't know if he's going to listen to it or not, but our CTO Oliver, we did this awkward dance during the interview of I'm going to test Steve's comfort level. I was interviewing for actually a different role. I was interviewing for director at home base, and Oliver said to me, "You're not a director yet," but he said yet because he followed up with, "You're not a director yet, but I want to help you get there." To which I said, "You're right. Tell me what I'm missing." And and that was actually the single point that actually sold me on home base. He felt comfortable enough to kind of see to explain to me what he saw, but also talk to me about growth potential, talk to me about the size of the pot that was available. I was more interested in the fact that he was frankly seeing things honestly, but he was also talking about growth. He wasn't trying to put me down. He felt comfortable enough with me to be honest. And that's the type of place I want to be in. And to your point, Nada, it's if he could be honest, so could I. I don't have to spend time maintaining a facade. I could be who I want to be and just see how far that takes me.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm not gonna add to that story because
I still respect him for saying that. So, if Oliver, you're here, thank you.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you truly, Steve, for your time. You can obviously find Steve on LinkedIn. You can find me obviously on LinkedIn too. And what I'll say is, if you know someone who could be hey, Steve set the bar high, but I'll say as amazing as Steve, then please let me know so that I can bring them on as a guest. And if you want to be notified of these types of events, then send me a DM, drop your email address so that we can notify you of these events. It's hard sometimes to
Mhm.
circulate them with the LinkedIn algorithm. So you can also, tell your friends, but drop your email if you like, and I can add you to my email list so that you can get those types of reminders. All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And thank you so much, Steve, for being here with us.
And thank you so much, Nada, for this wonderful platform. Thank you so much for everyone who stayed the entire
That was
hour.
amazing. We got like
Entire
74
hour.
people still live. Holy crap. It's like
It's
binging on
Tuesday night.
Netflix.
Most of you could be having dinner right now. So the fact that you're spending your time here with us, it just speaks volumes to how much you consider this valuable to all of you. So thank you so much for listening to our stories.
Amazing.